From brutal fights to even crazier entrances, Pride FC had unique events that no one can forget. So here are the real reasons why Pride FC was better than UFC. Let me start off with a bang. After all, some of the greatest MMA fights ever happened in Pride FC. No denying that UFC has put on some impressive shows lately, but let's be real. Some of those PPV cards were filled with snooze fests. Not to mention the fact that the best UFC fighters don't always get paired with the other top fighters. That's where Pride FC shines. They always had the top dogs in each division duking it out. For instance, take Wanderlei Silva. This guy was the Pride FC middleweight champion, and he faced off against Kazuki Sakuraba, Quentin Jackson, Dan Henderson, and more. Talk about a murderer's row. And let's not forget about Fedor Emelianenko, the undefeated heavyweight champion. He took on every challenger that came his way. Man, those were the days. Another legendary battle was between Emelianenko and Mirko Cro Cop. Honestly, there were so many great fights like Nick Diaz versus Takanori, Shogun Rua versus Rogerio Nogueira, and Sakuraba versus Royce Gracie. These fighters were all at the top of their game, and watching them go head-to-head was truly a sight to behold. But what made these fights so special were the fighters involved. I mean, Pride FC had some of the most entertaining fighters out there. Quentin Rampage Jackson was truly a beast in the ring, but he was also one of the funniest personalities in the MMA. One of the most memorable moments in the league was when Bas Rutten interviewed him before a fight.
His Rampage rules. Hit him hard, then take breaks. That's what I'm gonna do. Man, you f***ing that chicken up.
Yes, it's mine. Tearing it up. I tear every chicken up. Yeah. There's no going into that.
Yeah.
And Rampage was just chowing down on some fried chicken. Well, Bas decided to steal a piece for himself, and Jackson gave him the dirtiest look ever. Still, Rutten didn't care and enjoyed that chicken like it was his last meal. It was so hilarious to watch. It just goes to show how fun Pride FC events were from start to finish, unlike the UFC ones. They rarely let their fighters do anything fun or silly. In fact, Dana White just wants them to compete and then leave without allowing them to express themselves. After all, with Pride's entertaining fighters came awesome entrances. It's a shame that the UFC doesn't do much for its athletes when it comes to this. Sure, Conor McGregor's an exception since he had Sinead O'Connor sing for him, but other than that, most UFC fighters have pretty bland and boring entrances. Well, you know who did it right? Of course, Pride FC. They always treated their top fighters like Sakuraba, Fedor, and Jackson with awesome light shows and fireworks. Speaking of cool entrances, probably the most epic one was when Wanderlei Silva appeared beneath the stage in front of 67,000 fans. His techno music was blasting, and he made his way to the ring to face Rampage Jackson. It was totally insane. But as important as entrances are, having a good crew of announcers is important too. Sure, the UFC announcers like Mike Goldberg and Joe Rogan do a wonderful job, but the Pride FC announcers had their own charm. Bas Rutten and Steven Quadros were the original FC commentators, and they were literally a match made in heaven. Rutten was always entertaining on the mic, and Steven was great at keeping the conversation flowing. Besides this, Bas was also one of the greatest MMA fighters of all time, so you could tell that he always had an incredible insight into each fight he was calling. He'd come up with some crazy and quirky one-liners that would have you in stitches. Sadly, in 2003, Mauro Ranallo replaced Steven Quadros. But don't worry, Bas and Mauro were hilarious together too. In fact, they developed a deep bond that survived the test of time. They even launched a podcast together called Rutten and Ranallo, which is one of the most popular sports podcasts ever.
I would step on the platform to weigh in and just be like, Jesus Christ, he's made out of stone.
Yeah.
You know, it's just heavier. Boom.
I love those elbows. You remember that he threw so over the top and threw the defense on the ground when he was in the guard?
Right.
Yeah.
But besides the entrances and announcers, the true success of these fighting leagues lies in the support of the audience. And the Japanese audience always brought the right spirit to the Pride events. Unlike the loud and rowdy crowds we see at UFC events, the Pride FC audience was known for being incredibly quiet. This relaxed atmosphere made many of the fighters feel more comfortable in the ring. The Japanese fans were very knowledgeable and would cheer for simple things like ground transitions. They rarely booed fighters and always showed respect to them. MMA was a revered sport in Japan, and the fans treated it with a special level of loyalty and respect. But I think this next reason's a massive reason why Pride FC was better than UFC. And it's none other than the different rules in Pride FC. Back in the day, elbows were a big no-no in the league. The officials officials over there believe that elbow strikes were only good for one thing: splitting your opponent's face wide open. But when it came to the UFC, it's a totally different story. Elbows are allowed, and boy, do they make fights more gruesome.
Oh! He got him! Oh, my goodness!
He's gonna look for that elbow. He's out. Referee steps in. Matt the Immortal Brown. Exactly what he was looking for tonight.
Still, a nasty elbow can often lead to a stoppage, especially if it's slicing up someone's face like a Thanksgiving turkey. Elbows may not be the most powerful KO strikes, but they sure do cause some nasty cuts. And let's not forget about those yellow cards in Pride FC. If a fighter was stalling, they'd get hit with one of those bad boys and lose 10% of their pay. Talk about a motivator to keep on going. In addition, the fighters were allowed to get downright dirty with their moves. They could even spike or pile drive their opponents if they wanted to. Crazy, right? But let's be real. Pile driving someone is no joke and super dangerous. So even though it was allowed, it hardly ever happened. On the flip side, the UFC has a strict no pile drivers policy. They don't mess around when it comes to fighter safety. And while I'm on the subject, head stomps and soccer kicks are also a big no-no in the UFC. But in Pride FC, these moves were totally legal. But that wasn't the craziest rule. That honor goes to Pride's lenient drug testing policy. As for the UFC, the fighters over there may or may not be using performance-enhancing drugs. Well, Pride FC had a different approach to this matter. The officials didn't care if you were on the juice or not. In fact, they kind of encouraged it. The Pride FC fighters were allowed to take steroids without any consequences. That means some of these guys were pumped up with superhuman levels of energy and power. Just check out Wanderlei Silva's ripped physique in 2006 compared to now. He was an absolute beast and one of the greatest fighters of his time. And the interesting part is that it wasn't just Wanderlei who was allowed to juice up. Everyone in the league had the green light to get as swole as they wanted. So it goes without saying that the Pride FC events were more of a spectacle. The crazy Pride lady, the banging of the gong, and the walkouts. The league delivered when it came to putting on spectacular shows. Unlike UFC, the Pride FC shows were unique. Even when they brought their shows to America, things were different. Their events at the St. Thomas Super Arena and Bushido shows were on another level. I mean, they were packing in over 40,000 fans for every show. And when you've got that many people coming out to see the fights, you've got to give them something special. No wonder they stepped up their game when they came to America. Obviously, the administration had to make sure that they were putting on a show that would blow everyone's mind.
Dangerous. He's got to get out.
Try. Oh, Dan, I told you. He picked him up and slammed him to the
He's
ground.
out. He's out. He knocked him out. Unbelievable.
After all, it wasn't just about the fighting, it was about the whole experience. And let me tell you, they didn't disappoint. That's it for why Pride FC was better than the UFC.